Mr. Speaker, Jim Langevin of Rhode Island, thank you. Thank you for the courage that you have shown. I don't know how many of you know Jim Langevin's story. Involved in Police Boys Club, 16 years of age, at a police station in Rhode Island. Someone was cleaning his gun and went off by mistake, accidentally, ricocheted off a wall, and went into Mr. Langevin's spine. At 16 years of age, he was rendered unable to walk. Some people could have given up. Some people could have lamented that accident, which rendered them unable to walk and have limited mobility. Jim Langevin, of course, as we all see, did not do that. Jim Langevin decided that he was going to succeed and persevere and overcome. And Jim Langevin sits in the chair today presiding over the People's House. Think of what an extraordinary example that is to every person of whatever age who has a mobility impairment for whatever reasons, injured in Iraq, Afghanistan, or someplace at the point of the spear, comes back to this country. My friend Walt Minnick and Mike Simpson just introduced me to a young fellow who in May was injured in Afghanistan and lost both his legs. What an example Jim Langevin must be to him and to millions of others who are similarly situated. The promise of the Americans with Disabilities Act in July of 1990 was that we would open up the doors of opportunity in a country that prides itself on being the land of opportunity. As I have said a number of times this week, Thomas Jefferson indicated that the pursuit of happiness was a God-given right. But Thomas Jefferson, in his time, had a limited view. And we have found in generation after generation that we had to perfect that view. African Americans, of course, were not given the land of opportunities. We fought a civil war, and we adopted the 13th and 14th and 15th Amendments. Notwithstanding that, however, we did not at that point in time realize the full scope of the opportunity that we provided in that Declaration of Independence and theoretically in that beloved document of ours, the pride of our country, the United States Constitution. And so again, we perfected it. And in the early part of the last century, we said to those who are women in this body and around the country, no, what we really should have said is men and women are created equal and endowed by their Creator. And we want to include you and give you the right to vote. It's almost amazing that 90 years ago, or some 100 years ago, that women didn't have the right to vote in this country. And we perfected our country by amending our Constitution to expand further the opportunities. And then in 1964 and 65 and 57 and further, we've passed acts which have said, look, we said that African Americans were equal, but we still see discrimination. And Martin Luther King Jr. called our attention to the fact that this was not yet a perfect union and that work needed to be done. And 25 years after the 1965 Act, we saw a large group of people. We then said 45 million. We now use the figure 50 million people who have a disability. And because of that disability are excluded, are shut out, are not welcomed in, are not given what this lift is, a reasonable accommodation in the Americans with Disabilities Act. It simply says there's some things we can do to enhance somebody who is challenged with a disability to fully participate. We know that. Ed Markey is right next to me. We're going to pass a bill that we know that technology now is providing greater access to people who can't hear, and indeed to people who can't see, to fully participate in our society. Jim Langevin is the example of the realization of the promise of the July 26, 1990, signing by George Herbert Walker Bush, and said that we're going to knock down the walls of discrimination that confront the disabled. But what we were talking about was not the disability, we were talking about the discrimination. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court missed that. But fortunately for our country and those with disabilities, the Congress did not. And in every step of the way, this has been a bipartisan effort, led by a Republican president, made better by another Republican president, his son, George W. Bush, Jim Sensenbrenner. But let me mention someone that many of you may not know who are recently here. Steve Bartlett, congressman from Texas, became the mayor of Dallas. Worked with me almost every day for almost a full year in making sure that when we adopted the Americans with Disabilities Act, it would be workable, affordable, and effective. Jim Langevin, you are an example of that effectiveness. And so I thank you, as I said at the beginning, because you're a representative of literally millions of Americans who had the courage, the tenacity, and the vision to come to Washington or to come to town meetings to see people in their districts and talk to them about the challenges they confronted. So this is a great day to recognize what 20 years ago we who had the privilege of being here, working with President George Herbert Walker Bush, had the opportunity to do. The young man to which I referred is just brought in by you're his congressman, or his Mike. Any event, Mike and Walt Minnick represent this young man. Jim Sensenbrenner and I and Jim Langevin were the president a little earlier today. And I took out my cell phone and I punched D on my phone and I dialed the phone. And I said, "Hello, Bob," because Senator Dole was a critical person in passing this legislation. I passed the phone to President Obama. And President Obama said, "We're keeping the faith. What you wrought, we're going to continue to make even better." Thank you, Jim Langevin. Thank all of those who have a disability who made this happen. God bless you. I yield. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, our distinguished majority leader referenced that we had a special guest here today. I want to acknowledge the presence of Mr. Minnick's guest, Corporal Randal Wright. He lost both legs and a hand in Afghanistan. I think it's important that we have this juxtapositioning. As Mr. Patrick Kennedy said today in his remarks, we have many of our brave men and women in uniform who are fighting the fight for our country. They come home, many of them, with physical disabilities. We want them all to think about serving in Congress. So this, Corporal Randal Wright, is about you and your colleagues as well. Mr. Langevin has led the way. We want to take this opportunity to thank you for your patriotism, your courage, and your sacrifice for our country. But We want to thank Mr. Minnick and Mr. Marshall, the author of the Veterans Disabilities Act, for bringing Corporal Wright here. And Steny tells me that Corporal Wright got married this week as well. So. And so, my colleagues, I yield back the balance of my time, but once again, let us congratulate Mr. Langevin for presiding with such dignity over the House on this historic day. Congratulations and thank you, Jim Langevin.
Without objection, 5-minute voting will continue.